My name is Juliet Callahan, and I was 32 the night my mother tried to end my wedding with a whisper. 14 days before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, at our rehearsal dinner, my mom leaned toward my fiancé and told him I had a secret child I'd abandoned years ago. She said it soft, the way she says everything that's meant to cut. She has a secret child, she whispered. Don't let her trap you too. She thought she was handing him my shame. She thought she was saving him. But she had no idea what my family had quietly become, or what Ben was about to open on his phone, or whose car was already pulling into the parking lot outside. I didn't argue. I just sat there. What happened next took 8 years of silence and set it on fire. Welcome back to Wise Family Revenge, where quiet women find their voice, and the truth outlasts every lie ever told about them. If a family has ever tried to make you smaller just to keep the peace, if you ever swallowed a secret that was slowly swallowing you, then you already know this room. Pull up a chair. You're among friends here. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I spend my days handing babies to their mothers. I'm a labor and delivery nurse at St. Anne's, and I've been doing it for 6 years. I know the exact weight of a newborn in a blanket. I know how a woman's whole face changes the moment the crying starts and her arms close around it. I'm good at that moment. I'm the one they call when a delivery goes long and the room needs someone who won't flinch. There's a joke the other nurses make, that I could hand a baby to a mother in a hurricane and she'd still feel safe. They don't know why I'm good at it. They don't know that every single time, some small buried part of me is handing over a child I never got to keep. That week, I was 2 weeks out from marrying Ben Hayes, the steadiest man I've ever known. We had a small apartment on the east side, secondhand furniture, a coffee maker that took forever, and a kind of peace that we had both bled for. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was earned. But there was a room in my life I kept locked, even from Ben in the beginning. A room with a crib in it that I never built. For 8 years, I'd told myself that door was closed for good, that some things you just carry and never set down. What I didn't understand yet, standing in my scrubs that night with my key in the apartment door, was that in 14 days that locked room was going to be thrown wide open in front of everyone I knew, and I would be the one who opened it. My mother, Vivian Callahan, is 61 and has never in her life lost control of a room. She runs the flower committee at Grace Fellowship. She remembers everyone's anniversary and exactly what everyone did wrong. When I got engaged, she took over the wedding like it was a hostile country she'd been sent to civilize. Which caterer? Which linens? Which cousins got seated far from the bar? You just relax, sweetheart, she told me, meaning the opposite. Every choice ran through her, because to my mother love has always looked like control, and control has always been dressed up as love. She'd tell her church friends, dabbing her eyes, "My Juliet finally settled down. After everything, she finally got herself right." After everything. She said it like a bruise she kept pressing to make sure it still hurt. My dad, Raymond, sat in his recliner through all of it, nodding along the way. He's nodded along for 40 years. A man who decided a long time ago that peace was worth any price, even the ones other people had to pay. 2 weeks before the rehearsal, Mom came by with a binder. An actual binder. She flipped to the guest list and ran a manicured finger down the names, and near the bottom her finger stopped. "Now who are these people?" she said, tapping a name I'd added myself. "Just some co-workers of yours?" I kept my face the way I keep it at work when a monitor beeps wrong, and I don't want the mother to panic. "Something like that," I said. She looked at me a beat too long. Then she smiled and said the thing that put ice down my spine. "No surprises at this wedding, Juliet. This family has had enough surprises to last a lifetime." Ben and I found our way back to each other 2 years ago, and the peace we built was the kind you don't take for granted once you've lost it. He's a carpenter. He builds staircases mostly, the winding kind that other contractors won't touch. He has sawdust in the creases of his hands that never fully washes out, and he says a staircase is just a promise that the next floor is worth climbing to. That's Ben. He rebuilds trust the way he builds everything, one careful joint at a time, no shortcuts, no speeches. The night my mother dropped by with her binder, I sat on our kitchen floor afterward, and Ben sat down next to me. Because that's what he does. He meets you where you already are. My phone buzzed on the counter. I stood up, checked it, and read a message from a name my mother would have died to see. Karen M. Just a short line on the screen. She can't wait. I felt my whole chest go warm and then go tight. The way it always did lately. Joy and terror braided so close together I couldn't pull one loose without the other. I put the phone face down. Ben watched me do it. 2 weeks, he said quietly. Then we don't have to hide any of it anymore. I nodded, but I didn't believe him yet. You spend 8 years learning that some truths are too dangerous to say out loud, and you don't unlearn it in an evening. He reached over and squeezed my hand, sawdust and all. He knew who Karen M. was. He knew exactly what that message meant. And he knew that in 2 weeks, my mother was going to learn it too, whether she was ready or not. Here's the thing you have to understand about my mother, and it's the only thing that matters. She cannot stand not knowing. A secret in her house is a splinter under her skin, and she will dig at it until it bleeds or comes out, whichever happens first. So when she circled those names on the guest list, I knew we were in a race, and I knew she was faster than she looked. 2 days later, she called my dad's sister, my Aunt Ruth, and asked in her sweetest voice whether Ruth knew where I'd been spending my weekends lately. She called the caterer to confirm the final head count and tried to get the extra names off the list that way. She drove past our apartment on a Saturday I wasn't home and, according to our neighbor, sat in her car across the street for 20 minutes. Ben wanted to tell her everything right then. Get ahead of it, control the reveal. I said no. Not because I was ashamed, because I knew my mother, and I knew that if I handed her this truth before I was ready, she would not receive it. She would manage it. She would find a way to make it small, to make it mine, to fold it back into the story she'd been telling for 8 years. The one where I was the girl who almost ruined this family, and she was the woman who saved it. There were people coming to that rehearsal dinner she was not allowed to control. Not this time. If she found out who they really were before I was ready to stand up and say it myself, she would burn it down to protect the version of me she preferred. And I was done letting her hold the match. To tell you the rest, I have to take you back 8 years. To a bathroom floor in my parents' house where I sat holding a test I didn't need to read twice. I was 24. I was in nursing school, up to my neck in loans, living in my old bedroom to save money because that's what you do when you're one bad month from drowning. And I was in love with a carpenter named Ben Hayes, who my mother had already decided was beneath us. When I told her, she didn't yell. That's the part people never believe. She got very calm, very quiet, and she sat me down at the kitchen table and took both my hands like she was about to pray. "We'll handle this quietly," she said. "No one has to know. You have a whole life in front of you, sweetheart, and I am not going to let one mistake steal it." She said mistake so gently it took me years to feel the knife in it. Over the next months, she handled it, all right. She handled where I went and who I saw. She handled my phone. She told me Ben had heard and wanted nothing to do with a baby, that he'd said as much, that he was already gone. I was pregnant, exhausted, broke, and living under her roof, and every source of the outside world ran through her hands. I believed her because believing her was the only way to survive that house. What I did not know, sitting on that bathroom floor at 24, was that my mother was writing a lie that would take 8 years and a private investigator to unwrite, and that the man she swore had abandoned me had actually been writing me letters the whole time. Back to the present and the choice Ben and I had made. People hear secret, and they picture something dirty, something you hide because it would ruin you. That's what my mother thought she'd smelled on me. But what Ben and I were hiding wasn't a shame. It was a family she didn't know existed. Over the past year and a half, quietly, carefully, on weekends I told my mother were extra shifts. Ben and I had been driving 3 hours north to a town called Fairview, to a blue house with a swing set in the yard, to have lunch with a little girl and the 2 people who had raised her into the kindest child I have ever met. We were not sneaking around because we'd done something wrong. We were protecting something fragile from a woman who breaks fragile things to feel in control. We had decided, Ben and I, that the truth would come out on our terms, in a way that was safe for our daughter and for the family who loved her. We'd invited them to the very end of the rehearsal dinner, quietly, to be introduced after the toasts, when the room was warm and full and my mother would have to meet them like human beings instead of a threat. That was the plan. It was a good plan. It depended on my mother not finding out first, and it depended on me, for once in my life, holding my ground in a room instead of smoothing it over. I should have known better than to think my mother would let a surprise she couldn't control walk into a room she was standing in, but I wanted so badly to believe that this time the truth would be enough. 2 weeks. That's all we needed. Let me tell you how Ben came back into my life, because it wasn't a plan. It was an accident. The good kind. The kind that cracks your whole world open. 2 years ago, a nurse I'd trained with got married and I almost didn't go. I hate weddings for reasons that will become obvious. But I went. And I was standing by the coat rack trying to talk myself into leaving early when a man's voice behind me said my name like it hurt to say. I turned around and it was Ben. Older, broader, sawdust in the creases of his hands, and looking at me like he was seeing a ghost he'd grieved. We stood there while the DJ played something loud and stupid, and neither of us could speak. Finally, he said the thing that split my life into before and after. "Why did you never answer my letters, Juliet?" I actually laughed because it made no sense. "What letters?" His face did something I'll never forget. It went from angry to confused to something much worse, a slow horror, like a man watching the floor disappear under his feet. "I wrote you for months," he said, "after the baby. I sent everything to your mother's house because I didn't have your new address. I begged you to talk to me. You never wrote back. Your mother told me you'd made your choice and I needed to respect it." I remember the room got very far away. I remember gripping the coat rack. Because I had been told the mirror image of that story. I'd been told Ben was gone, that he wanted nothing, that he'd walked away without a backward glance. 2 people, lied to in opposite directions, kept apart by the same set of hands. And somewhere out there, a little girl neither of us had been allowed to keep. We sat in his truck in the wedding parking lot for 3 hours and pieced it together like 2 people reassembling a broken plate in the dark. In 2018, my mother had told Ben that I'd chosen a family for the baby and wanted no contact with him ever again. She'd told him, in her calm and reasonable voice, that showing up would only hurt me, that the loving thing to do was disappear. And she'd told me, in that same voice, that Ben had heard about the pregnancy and bolted, that he wasn't the man I thought, that I was better off. She fed each of us the version most likely to make us let go. She was very good at it. She had a lifetime of practice reading exactly which lie a person was most ready to believe. The letters he'd written me, dozens of them, had gone to my mother's mailbox and never made it to my hands. I don't know if she burned them or boxed them or dropped them off a bridge. I know I never saw a single one. And the cruelest part, the part that kept me up nights after that parking lot, was that it worked. For 8 years it worked. I grieved a man who had never left. I carried a shame that was handed to me like a coat. And I wore it because the person who gave it to me was the person I most needed to love me. Sitting in that truck, I finally let myself ask the question I'd never dared to ask. Whose shame was I actually carrying all this time? Because it had never felt like mine. It had always felt like something loaned to me, something I was holding for someone else. I just hadn't understood yet who it really belonged to, or how much it was going to cost to hand it back. We did it the slow way, the right way, because our daughter deserved that, and so did the people raising her. I want to be clear about something, because I know how these stories can sound. We were not trying to take a child back. What was done in 2018 was legal. I was an adult. I had signed papers. In a fog of exhaustion and grief and lies, but I had signed them, and I was not interested in dragging an 8-year-old through a courtroom to fix what my mother broke. That was never the goal. The goal was smaller and harder. We just wanted to know she was okay. So we hired a private investigator, a patient woman named Denise, who did this kind of work with families, and she traced the placement through the agency my mother had used. It took months. When Denise found the family, she did not give us an address and turn us loose. She reached out through the agency, the proper way, and she waited. Because the family that adopted our daughter got to decide whether we existed to them or not. That was their right. I spent those weeks the way you'd spend them, sleeping badly, jumping every time my phone lit up, rehearsing 100 versions of a letter to strangers who owed me nothing and held everything. What could I possibly say? Hello, you don't know me, but the child you've raised for 6 years came from my body, and I let her go because I was young and lied to and afraid. Please, I just want to know her name. That's what I wrote, more or less. Denise sent it through the agency. And then we waited to find out whether the kindest people in this story would open a door or close it, and whether my daughter would grow up knowing my face or only my absence. Karen Merrick called me on a Tuesday. I was in the hospital parking garage, still in my scrubs, and I sat down on the concrete curb when I saw the unknown number because some part of me already knew. Her voice was warm in a way I wasn't ready for. She said her name, and then she said, "We've been hoping you'd find us, honestly. We always told Lily her story would be hers to know when she was ready." Lily. That was the first time I heard my daughter's name spoken by the woman who chose it. I put my hand over my mouth so Karen wouldn't hear what came out of me. The Merricks, it turned out, had done what's called an open adoption, or as open as my mother's arrangement had allowed. They had always intended, from the beginning, to tell Lily the truth in an age-appropriate way and to welcome her birth family, if her birth family ever came looking, because they believed a child could not have too many people who loved her. Do you understand what that is? That's the exact opposite of everything I was raised to believe. My mother taught me that love is a fixed amount, that it has to be guarded and rationed and controlled. Karen Merrick believed love multiplies. Our first meeting was in a family counselor's office, all of us, slow and careful, with a professional in the room to keep it safe for Lily. She was 6 then. She had Ben's eyes and my stubborn cowlick, and she called me Miss Juliet and showed me a drawing of a cat. I did not cry in front of her, because Karen had gently coached me not to make it too big, too fast. I cried the entire 3-hour drive home. Ben drove. I watched the highway lines blur and understood finally what a real family actually looked like. I need to stop here for a second, because I know some of you are sitting very still right now. If you have ever been told to keep a secret that was quietly breaking you, to protect someone else's reputation, to hold your tongue so the family could keep pretending, then I already know your face. I wore it for 8 years. I want you to hear the next part carefully, because it's the part where I stopped holding the match for the woman who lit the fire. If any of this is landing where it lives, do me a favor. Comment the word truth, so I know you're here, so I know someone out there is finally setting down a weight that was never theirs. And subscribe, because there's a mother watching who needs to find her way to this story tonight, and the only way she does is if you help me carry it to her. Now. Over the next 18 months, those careful visits to the Blue House in Fairview became the truest thing in my life. We didn't rush it. We let Lily lead. Some visits she wanted to show me every toy she owned, and some visits she was shy and hid behind Karen's leg, and both were fine, because Karen and Tom had taught her that she never had to perform for anyone's love. Tom would grill burgers and talk to Ben about staircases. Karen would sit with me on the porch and let me ask 1,000 questions about a childhood I'd missed. And slowly, without anyone forcing it, a little girl started saving her best drawings for the weekends we came. She started drawing us. And one Saturday in the spring, she handed me a drawing that I have not let out of my sight since. It was drawn in crayon on a piece of paper that had been folded and unfolded so many times, the creases had gone soft as cloth. 2 houses side by side, a blue one and a yellow one, a fat yellow sun in the corner and a rainbow arcing over both roofs. And underneath, holding hands in a wobbly row, 5 stick figures. Lily had labeled each one in her careful second-grade printing. Mom and Dad standing by the blue house, which was Karen and Tom. Then Ben, tall, with brown scribbles for the sawdust, I like to think. Then a figure with a big triangle dress that she'd labeled Miss Juliet, though by then she'd started, on her own, sometimes calling me something else. And in the middle, small, holding on to everyone at once, a figure with a stubborn cowlick just like mine. Across the top, in letters that went uphill because she'd run out of room, she had written, "My families." Not family. Families. Plural. This 8-year-old had done in one crayon drawing what my whole grown family could not do in 8 years. She had looked at all the people who loved her, the ones who raised her, and the ones who found her. And instead of choosing, instead of ranking, instead of guarding love like it might run out, she had simply drawn everyone holding hands and given them all a house and a son. Ben took out his phone and photographed it, because he's the practical one and he wanted a copy in case anything ever happened to the original. I laughed at him for it at the time. I kept the real one folded in the inside pocket of my purse, and I carried it everywhere, to work, to the grocery store, to bed. I had no idea, that spring afternoon on the Merrick's porch, that in a matter of weeks that photograph on Ben's phone was going to walk into a rehearsal dinner and detonate my mother's entire world. My mother has a nose for happiness she didn't authorize. As the wedding got closer, she could tell something in me had shifted, and it made her nervous the way a change in the weather makes an old dog pace. I was lighter. I hummed. I stopped flinching when she brought up after everything. And to my mother, a daughter who has stopped flinching is a daughter who has stopped being controlled, and that could not stand. So she started digging, the way she always does, quietly, through other people. She got my Aunt Ruth to admit I'd mentioned a town up north. She noticed the mileage on my car didn't match a woman working extra shifts at a hospital 10 minutes away. And then she found something. I still don't know exactly what. A receipt in a coat pocket, a text I'd left open, a name on a calendar. Enough. Enough for a woman who had already written the story in her head to fill in the blanks with the ugliest ink she had. She did not think. My daughter found the child she gave up and healed something broken. She could not think that, because that story would make her the villain, and my mother has never once been the villain in her own telling. So she reached for the story that made her the hero again. She decided I had a secret child I'd hidden even from Ben. That I was a woman with a shameful past, trapping a good man into a marriage under false pretenses. That it was, once again, her holy duty to save someone from my mistake. She got it exactly, precisely backwards. And with 2 weeks left before my wedding, my mother started sharpening the one weapon she had always trusted most. Not a fact. A whisper. The kind she could lean in and deliver. Soft as a blessing. Sharp as a blade. I want to tell you something about my mother that I did not understand until I was grown, and it's the only thing that ever made her make sense. She learned this. Somebody taught it to her first. When my mother was 19, back in a small town that ran on church gossip and closed doors, she fell in love with a boy her family didn't approve of, and she got pregnant, and her own mother did to her exactly what she would one day do to me. Except worse, because it was 1983, and there was no softening it. My grandmother sent her away to have the baby in another county, made her give it up, and told the whole congregation my mother had gone to care for a sick aunt. When she came home, empty-armed and hollow, my grandmother met her at the door and said, and my mother repeated this to me only once, in the dark, years ago. "We will never speak of this again, and you will be grateful I saved your life." My mother spent her whole life being grateful for the thing that broke her. She married a safe, quiet man. She built a fortress of respectability and committee meetings and casseroles. And when her own daughter came home pregnant at 24, some terrified 19-year-old still living inside her looked at me and did the only thing she knew how to do with that much pain. She passed it down. She truly believed she was saving me, the way she'd been told she was saved. That's the part that isn't simple. My mother was not a monster in a fairy tale. She was a wounded woman handing her daughter the exact wound that had been handed to her, calling it love the whole way down, because if it wasn't love, then she'd have to look at what had actually been done to her, and she could not survive that. Understanding my mother did not excuse her, and it did not prepare me for what I learned about my father 10 days before the wedding, in the worst conversation of my life. I'd gone to their house to drop off something for the ceremony, and my dad was alone in the garage, sanding a chair he didn't need to sand, which is what he does instead of feeling things. I don't fully know why I said it. Maybe because I was finally strong enough to. I said, "Dad, did you know Ben wrote me letters after the baby? That Mom kept them?" I watched my father's hands go still on the sandpaper. He didn't turn around, and in the silence that followed, in the way his shoulders came up around his ears, I got my answer before he said a single word. "Your mother thought she knew best," he finally said, to the chair, not to me. "She usually did. It was easier to let her handle things." Easier. My whole childhood in one word. My father had known. Not everything, maybe, but enough. He had seen the letters come. He had watched his daughter grieve a man who was 3 towns away begging to be let in, and he had decided that keeping the peace with his wife was worth more than the truth his daughter was drowning without. He wasn't cruel. That's what makes it worse somehow. He was just weak in the specific way that lets cruelty happen and keeps its hands clean. I had spent my whole life thinking of my dad as the neutral one, the safe one, the one caught in the middle. Standing in that garage, I understood there is no neutral. There's the person who tells the lie, and the person who lets it stand. And by the time it reaches you, you can't tell their hands apart. I drove home that night knowing I was, finally and completely, on my own. The night before the rehearsal dinner, Ben and I sat at our kitchen table and went over the plan one more time, the way you check a lock you've already checked twice. The Merricks would drive down that afternoon and stay at a hotel near the restaurant. They'd come to the very end of the dinner, after the toasts, when the wine had softened everyone and the room was warm. Ben and I would stand up together. We'd tell the story simply and with dignity. Our story. The true one. And then we'd introduce them, Karen and Tom and Lily, not as a scandal, but as what they were. Our family. I still believed, even then, that I would get to tell it my way. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I had planned every word. I had a version where I stayed calm and generous, where I gave my mother a soft place to land, where nobody had to be the villain. I wanted to control the reveal almost as badly as she wanted to control me, and I didn't even see the irony until later. Ben reached across the table and put his hand over mine. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "you don't have to protect her anymore. That was never your job." I nodded. I told him I knew. But somewhere under my ribs, the 24-year-old on the bathroom floor was still whispering that if I could just manage the room carefully enough, keep everyone comfortable, keep the peace, then maybe, for once, it wouldn't cost me anything. I went to bed thinking I could have the truth and keep my mother too. I was wrong about that. By the next night, I would have to choose, in front of everyone I knew, between the daughter I'd been and the mother I was becoming. The restaurant was called Il Forno, a warm brick place with a private back room my mother had chosen and, naturally, redecorated in her head. Candles down the middle of a long table, 2 families worth of people, Ben's small quiet clan on one side, the loud Callahan cousins on the other. My mother had worn navy, which she saves for occasions she intends to dominate. She was radiant. She worked the room like a woman running for office, touching elbows, refilling glasses, laughing her committee laugh. And every few minutes, her eyes found me. There's a look my mother gives that no one else can read but me, a stillness behind the smile, the look of a woman holding something and waiting for the exact right moment to set it down where it'll do the most damage. I felt it land on me over the antipasto and again over the soup, and my stomach turned to water each time. My purse was under my chair. I could feel the corner of Lily's drawing through the leather, folded soft, the truest thing in that whole bright room. I kept my hand near it like a talisman. Across the table, Ben caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod, steady as a level. He had the photograph on his phone. The Merricks were 40 minutes out, finishing dinner at their hotel, waiting for my text. All I had to do was get through the toasts. All I had to do was hold the line for 1 more hour and then tell the story my way, calm and generous, the way I'd rehearsed 100 times. My mother stood near the end of the salad course and lifted her wine glass, and I thought, here it comes, a toast. But her eyes weren't on me. They were locked on Ben. She didn't make a toast. She set her glass down, murmured something about the cake, and drifted around the table toward Ben with that gliding committee walk, stopping just behind his chair. I was 3 seats down and across, close enough to see, too far to stop it. She bent at the waist, one hand light on Ben's shoulder like a benediction, and she brought her mouth close to his ear. I couldn't hear the words from where I sat. I didn't need to. I had watched my mother deliver bad news as a gift my entire life, and I knew the exact shape her face makes when she is about to ruin someone for their own good. Soft eyes, sad little smile, the performance of a woman who takes no pleasure in what she's forced to do. I found out later, word for word, what she whispered, because Ben told me that night while I shook in his arms. She said, I have to tell you something, sweetheart, because I love you, and someone should have warned me once. She has a secret child. Don't let her trap you too. She has a secret child. Don't let her trap you too. She thought she was handing him a grenade. She thought she was the brave one, the truth teller, saving a good man from the daughter she'd never managed to fully break. She had waited for the warmest moment in the room, with 2 families watching and the candles low, to slide the knife in soft. My mother had spent 8 years believing that this secret was the worst thing about me, the shameful thing, the trap. She had built her whole understanding of me around it, and she had absolutely no idea that she had just whispered it to the one person in the world who already knew every word of the truth. Ben's face didn't move. I watched my mother straighten up, satisfied, and glide back toward her seat. And I watched Ben sit very still with his hands flat on the tablecloth. And I understood that the moment I'd been dreading for 2 weeks had just arrived early and on her terms, not mine. My whole life, I have been the one who fixes rooms. When something goes wrong at a party, at a bedside, at a table, I'm the one who steps in and smooths it over so nobody has to feel the sharp edge of it. It's why I'm good at my job, and it's why I survived my childhood. Every cell in my body was screaming the old script at me. Stand up, laugh it off, pull Ben aside, take Mom's arm, make a joke, keep the peace, don't let anyone feel the crack running down the middle of this family. I could have done it. I was so good at it, I could have made that whole table believe nothing had happened at all. And I sat there, and I did not do it. I didn't argue. I didn't stand. I didn't rush to smooth anything. I just sat in my chair with my hand resting on my purse where a crayon drawing said, "My families," and for the first time in my life, I let a terrible silence in a room stay terrible. Because I finally understood what I had never let myself understand before. My whole life, keeping the peace had never actually kept the peace. It had just kept me quiet. And there is a difference between a room that is calm and a room that is silenced, and I had spent 32 years confusing the two. So I sat still, and I waited to see what my future husband would do with the truth. Ben stood up, not fast, not angry. He rose the way he does everything, deliberate, like a man testing that a stair will hold before he puts his weight on it. The cousins' chatter died down by degrees as people noticed him standing there, and my mother settled back into her seat with a pleased little tilt to her chin, certain she'd set something in motion that was about to play out in her favor. Ben took his phone out of his jacket pocket. He didn't raise his voice. He looked down the table at my mother, and in a voice that was quiet but carried into every corner of that hushed brick room, he said, "Vivian, I want to make sure I understand you correctly." He turned the phone in his hand, thumbed it open, and I knew from across the table exactly which photo he was pulling up. The blue house and the yellow house. The rainbow. 5 stick figures holding hands under a fat crayon sun. He held the phone up so she could see the screen, and then he walked 3 steps and set it gently on the tablecloth in front of her, facing her. And he said the words that split that dinner into before and after. "Is this the child?" My mother looked down at the screen. I watched her read it. The way you watch someone step on ice that's about to give. She saw the drawing. She saw the wobbly letters across the top. And I could see the exact instant the ground shifted under her, because she had come to that table holding what she thought was my deepest shame, and my future husband had just calmly laid a child's drawing in front of her and asked her to name it. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. And the front door of the restaurant opened. "Yes," Ben said, before she could find a word, answering his own question in a voice that finally had something underneath it. "It is. She's mine, Vivian. She's ours. She's your granddaughter." The word landed on that table like a dropped plate. Granddaughter. I watched it travel around the room, watched the cousins' faces change, watched Aunt Ruth's hand go to her mouth, watched my father go gray. And I watched my mother, who had come armored for a battle against my shame, sit frozen as the whole shape of the thing rearranged itself in front of her. The secret child she'd been so eager to expose, the trap, the proof of my ruin, was not a scandal I was hiding. She was a little girl with Ben's eyes and my cowlick who drew rainbows over two houses because she had too much love to fit under one roof. My mother had spent 8 years polishing this secret into a weapon. She'd carried it, sharpened it, waited for the perfect candlelit moment to drive it into my marriage. And in the space of one photograph and one word, it had turned in her hand and cut nobody but her. Because you cannot shame a woman with the existence of a child that everyone at the table can now see is loved. The whisper only had power as long as I agreed to be ashamed of what it named, and I didn't anymore. I felt something come loose in my chest that had been clenched so long I'd stopped feeling it, like a fist I'd been making for 8 years finally, slowly opening. My mother stared at the drawing on the tablecloth. And behind her, from the direction of the opening door, I heard the one sound in the world that could have made that moment complete. A child's voice saying, "Miss Juliet?" They were early. Karen told me later that Lily had been too excited to finish her dinner, that she'd kept asking if it was time yet, and finally Tom had just laughed and got in the car. So instead of arriving after the toasts, the way we'd planned, my daughter walked into that rehearsal dinner at the exact moment my mother needed her not to. Lily came through the door in a yellow dress she'd picked herself, with Karen holding one hand and Tom a step behind, and she scanned that room full of strangers with a flash of uncertainty, and then she found my face, and her whole self lit up. "Miss Juliet!" She let go of Karen's hand and ran, actually ran, across that hushed room full of frozen adults, and she threw her arms around my waist as I came out of my chair to catch her. I want you to understand what that room saw. Every single person at that table had, in the last 2 minutes, heard my mother's version, the secret, the shame, the abandoned child, the trap. And then the door opened and that same child ran the length of the room to bury her face in my chest, safe and certain and loved, followed by the 2 people who had raised her walking in with warm, open faces. There was no scandal in that. There was nowhere to put the shame my mother had brought. It had no place to land. Lily looked up at me and said, "Karen said I could give you a hug first before dinner, is that okay?" And I said, "That is more than okay, sweetheart." In the steadiest voice I had, and over the top of her head I looked straight down the table at my mother. And I watched her understand, at last, that she had lost. My mother is not a woman who loses gracefully. When the story she'd bet everything on collapsed in front of 2 families, she did what wounded controllers always do. She reached for the shame again. Harder, because it was the only tool she had ever owned. She stood up from her chair, and the pleasant committee mask was gone now, and she came around the table toward me with her voice low and shaking. "What is this?" she hissed, quiet enough that she still thought she could keep it between us, loud enough that the nearest cousins went still. "You brought them here? To your rehearsal dinner? In front of everyone?" She looked at Lily pressed against me and something crossed her face that I refused to describe as anything but fear, because a happy grandchild was the one thing that could unmake her whole life's story. "Have you lost your mind, Juliet? Do you have any idea what people are going to say? Think about your father. Think about this family. Think about what you're doing to all of us." There it was. The whole machine, running in the open now. Think about the family. Think about what people will say. Think about everyone except yourself. And certainly except the child. It was the exact sentence my grandmother had said to her at 19, wearing my mother's face, coming 40 years down the line to land on me. And I finally heard it for what it was. Not concern. A leash. A soft leather leash she'd looped around my neck when I was 24 and had been gently tugging ever since, and I had followed it, telling myself the tug was love. Lily's arms were warm around my waist. Ben stood at my shoulder. The Merricks waited by the door with the patience of people who had nothing to be ashamed of. And my mother stood in front of me, holding out the leash one more time, certain I would put my head back through it the way I always had. And then, because my mother is nothing if not a strategist, she changed tactics right in front of me. She saw the room turning, felt the shame refusing to stick, and she pivoted to the thing that had always worked on me when force did not. She lowered her voice until it was almost tender, and she offered me a way out. "All right," she breathed, glancing at the watching cousins, at Ben, at the little girl holding my waist. "All right. Listen to me. It doesn't have to be like this. Send them home, quietly, right now. We'll say it was a misunderstanding. Nobody outside this room ever has to know the details. And I will stand up at your wedding in 2 weeks, and I will smile, and I will be the proud mother of the bride, and this family stays whole, and you get your nice day. That's what you want, isn't it? A nice day? Nobody hurt. Just send them home and let me fix this." And God help me. For one long breath, I felt the old pull, because she was offering me the thing I'd wanted my whole life, a family that stayed together. A mother who showed up smiling, a day with no wound in the middle of it. All I had to do was send my daughter back out that door into the dark and agree, one more time, to be ashamed of her in exchange for peace. That was the price. That was always the price with my mother, and I had been paying it in installments for 32 years without ever reading the invoice. Send Lily home and keep my mother. Or claim my daughter out loud in front of everyone and lose the woman who raised me, this time for good. There was no version where I got both. I felt Lily's cheek against my side. I felt the crease of her drawing in my purse. And I understood that whatever I said next, I was going to lose something I could never get back. I put my hand on Lily's back, and I looked at my mother, and I did not raise my voice. That's the part I'm proudest of. I had spent my whole life watching her stay calm while she cut people, and I finally understood that calm isn't the same as gentle, and gentle isn't the same as kind. So I stayed calm, but I told the truth, and I told all of it, out loud, in that bright brick room in front of everyone she'd ever wanted to impress. "No, Mom," I said, "I'm not going to send them home. This is Lily. She's my daughter and Ben's, and she is also Karen and Tom's, and there is room for all of it, whether you understand that or not." I turned so the whole table could hear me, because I was done whispering. 8 years ago I got pregnant, and I was 24, and broke, and scared, and living in this woman's house. And she told me Ben had abandoned me. She told him I'd chosen to cut him off. She took the letters he wrote me, and I never saw a single one. She sat me down when I was exhausted and grieving, and she told me the loving thing to do was give my baby away quietly so no one would ever know. And then she made me carry the shame of it for 8 years, like it was mine. I looked back at my mother, and I said the thing I had needed to say since I was 24 years old on a bathroom floor. The shame was never mine to carry. It was yours. The room was so quiet I could hear the candles. I gathered Lily a little closer and I looked at Karen and Tom standing by the door, these strangers who had loved my child the way I couldn't, and I said it plain, so everyone would hear where I stood. "Thank you for raising her. Thank you for letting me in. Family isn't who shares your blood or who keeps your secrets. Family is who shows up when the truth does. And every person who loves this little girl is standing in this room right now." I waited for my mother to break. Some small, stupid, hopeful part of me, the part that will apparently never fully die, waited for her to look at that little girl and feel whatever I was feeling, to set the weapon down, to choose us. She had the moment. It was right there in front of her. A granddaughter in a yellow dress, a chance to become something other than what her own mother had made her. And she did not take it. Because taking it would have meant admitting that the thing she'd done to me, and the thing that had been done to her, was not love and not saving, but simply harm, passed down like an heirloom, and my mother could not survive looking directly at that. So she chose the shame instead. She chose it the way she'd chosen it her whole life. She drew herself up, and her voice went cold and flat and final, and she said, "You've humiliated this family. You've humiliated your father and me in front of everyone. I hope she was worth it." And then she picked up her navy purse and she walked out of the restaurant, and a handful of the Callahan cousins scraped their chairs back and followed her out into the parking lot. Because that's what you do in my family. You follow the loudest person out the door. My father sat there. For a moment I hoped, he would go after her. And for a moment I thought he might stay for me. And in the end, he did neither cleanly. He sat frozen at the table with his hands in his lap, a man who had spent 40 years letting her handle things and no longer knew how to handle anything himself. I watched my mother's navy back disappear through the door, and I did not run after her. Do you understand what that cost? I had chased that woman my whole life. I had contorted myself into 100 shapes trying to earn a smile she rationed out like it might run dry. And I let her walk out that door, because I finally had something I was not willing to trade for her approval, and that something was standing beside me in a yellow dress. The door swung shut behind her, and the room let out a breath it had been holding. Karen crossed the floor without a word and put her arm around my shoulders, and Tom crouched down to Lily's level and murmured something that made her giggle and loosen the fear in the room. Ben's hand found the small of my back. And standing there in the wreckage of the dinner my mother had detonated, I felt something I did not expect. Not triumph. Not even relief. Not yet. What I felt was the strange, aching lightness of a weight you've carried so long you'd stop believing it could ever come off. For 8 years I had told myself that keeping my mother's secret was the price of keeping my family, that silence was a kind of love, that if I just stayed quiet and small and manageable, I could hold us all together. And it had all been a lie, the same lie, handed down mother to daughter for 3 generations, wearing the costume of love. Silence had never held my family together. It had only held me down. And the cruelest thing I realized, watching Lily laugh at whatever Tom had whispered, was that if I had taken my mother's deal, if I had sent that little girl home to keep the peace, I would not have been protecting my family at all. I would have been becoming my mother, handing the shame down one more generation, teaching a child, without a word, that some love has to hide. I looked at the people around me, the ones who had driven 3 hours to show up, and I understood at last that I had not lost my family that night. I had finally, at 32 years old, chosen one. We got married 14 days later, in a small stone church that wasn't my mother's, and a backyard that belonged to a friend. It was not the wedding in the binder. It was better. Lily was our flower girl. She took the job with tremendous seriousness, walking so slowly and scattering the petals so carefully that the whole guest list started laughing with love before I ever reached the aisle. Karen and Tom sat in the front row where the parents of the bride are supposed to sit, because on that day, in every way that counted, that's who they were. There was a chair we'd set out on the family side that stayed empty. My mother did not come. I hadn't really expected her to, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't look at that empty chair once during the vows. My father came, late, in a suit that hung on him, and he stood at the very back near the door like a man who wasn't sure he'd been invited, which he had been, because I am not my mother and I don't make people disappear. He didn't say much. He hugged me stiffly afterward and said, "You look nice, Jules." And that was about all either of us could manage, and it will be a long road, if it's a road at all. The family split that night, and it stayed split. Some of the cousins call, some don't. My mother told the congregation her version, and some of them believe her. And I've made a strange kind of peace with the fact that I can't control that and don't need to. The wound didn't close because I told the truth. But it stopped being mine to carry alone, And that turned out to be a different and better kind of healing. Here is what my life looks like now, and it's quieter than you'd think after a night like that. Ben and I drive up to Fairview about twice a month, and Lily comes down to stay with us some school breaks, and it all runs on Karen and Tom's lead, the way it always has, because they are her parents and I would not have it any other way. I am not trying to be her mother. She has a wonderful one. I'm something the English language doesn't have a tidy word for, and we're all just fine with that. She started calling me Jules, same as her, which undoes me every time. I still work the labor and delivery floor at St. Anne's. I still hand babies to their mothers in the first raw minutes. But the ache that used to come with it is gone now, or mostly gone, because I finally got to stop grieving a daughter who, it turns out, was 3 hours up the highway drawing rainbows the whole time. My mother has never apologized. Every so often a cold, brief text arrives, correct and empty, and I answer it kindly, and I do not chase it. That leash is off. I don't miss the wait. I spent 8 years believing that silence was love and that shame was a debt I'd been born owing. It wasn't. Family isn't the people who share your blood or guard your secrets or tug the leash and call it care. Family is who shows up when the truth does, and the shame was never, ever mine to carry. That's my story. A whisper meant to bury me, a crayon drawing that told the truth before any of us could, and a little girl who ran the length of a crowded room to reach me. If someone ever handed you a shame that was never yours to hold, hear me tonight. You're allowed to set it down. You're allowed to choose the family that shows up. If this reached you, share it with a woman who needs it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.